Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Adam Interviews, where we continue every weeknight to interview a new and interesting person in our community. Sometimes it's things that they do, sometimes it's insight that they have, and that's what's happening today. Today we brought in a professor from Nazareth University, someone we've brought in many times over the years to offer insight not just on local politics but national issues. And of course, this morning we woke up to the federal government being shut down. But that doesn't mean that every department is shut down or certain vital services aren't being offered, but there is an effect, and that effect can get magnified over time should this not get solved. So joining me now, as he has so many times over the years, we've got Professor Tim Nealon. Tim, thank you so much.
Adam, thanks for having me.
Of course, always a pleasure. So let's first start by asking ourselves the basic question, like what exactly is happening right now?
Well, right now the government is shut down. That is, it has no funding to continue operations. Now that is not going to affect everything immediately. So, for example, our social services, they have a separate stream of funding. So your Social Security check will come, right? Other vital social services will continue. The Smithsonian's got a little extra money to run through October 6th. Some of the national parks have some money. So you may not see the effects immediately, but for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of federal workers, they were furloughed as of 12:01 this morning, and they're waiting to hear, and they will not get paid. And those that do report also won't get paid until they actually get a budget. So you've got people doing things like TSA, FBI, other things, but they will not be getting paid. And they, of course, will expect some sort of retroactive pay when this is settled at some point.
And I believe our last one was in 2017?
Well, yeah, there was one in 2019.
2019, excuse me.
Yes. I think this is like the fourth one under Trump as his two terms. And so, yeah, we've seen this before. And so how this plays out really will depend to a certain extent on the American public. I think both sides are playing a little bit of partisan politics, and they're waiting to see how the poll data comes out. Who's going to get the blame for the government shutdown this time?
And you already see different parties positioning themselves to try and say it's the other guy, of course. I hear it comes down to healthcare subsidies. What's going on there?
Okay, so during COVID, there was a series of legislation that increased the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. So it expanded coverage, gave consumers who make, everything from very low dollars to, I would say, middle income people getting some sort of subsidy if they needed to go to so-called Obamacare. Now, those have expired or are expiring at the end of this year, I should say. And the Democrats are like, no, we need those extended. And this is our leverage. They don't have the majority in the Senate or the House, and so this is a way for them to make sure that is covered. They'd also like some restorations in healthcare that were taken away under a current budget proposal by Trump. So they would like to see some restoration of healthcare funding already. And I know they would also like to fund things like NPR and some of the other things. But right now they're holding out on the healthcare, and the Republicans are like, no, we just want a clean continuing resolution. We just want to keep the government open until, say, November 21st, during which time we can negotiate on these issues that you want.
How long do these usually last?
Well, the longest, I think, was like 35 days, which most of the time, one side or the other gives in after a couple of weeks because of the pain felt by the American consumer. Let's say you do show up at the airport and the TSA is working. They're not getting paid. And one of the last times this happened, a lot of people called out. They said they were sick and didn't come into work, which of course delayed lines and made transportation and travel kind of a nightmare for the American public. And so, again, those kind of things are likely to happen the longer this stretches out. So both sides, I'm sure, would like to come to some sort of conclusion on this to end it, both sides getting something in the end. But we'll have to wait and see, because Donald Trump is using this as an opportunity perhaps to actually fire workers as part of his plan to shrink the federal government.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering about that because he's already done that. Obviously, you had Doge with Elon Musk early on in the administration. Does he need a reason? I mean, couldn't he have done that already and extended the federal cuts that he's already made?
He could have, but also as we get to now identify what an essential worker is, and the president and the executive branch have tremendous power to define what an essential worker is. This is basically, there's been a memo from the Office of Management and Budget to the various departments saying, okay, here's your opportunity to really clean house. We made some cuts on new hires and some other things. Now they want to go even deeper. DOGE did what it did, but frankly, it was not nearly as effective as Trump and his partisan followers wanted. It didn't cut deep enough, and this would really maybe get to the bone. And I think that's what Trump would like to see.
That's interesting, because you look at some of the agencies that they did cut from, with the Weather Service, the NOAA stuff, and then they ended up hiring meteorologists back.
Right. There is a cost for the American public in terms of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and for things like the National Weather Service. These are vital services, but they're already understaffed. And again, if people aren't getting paid, this may be a disincentive to show up to work, and could have ramifications for our safety and security.
Were you surprised that we saw the slow walk towards this over the last 2 weeks in particular. Are you surprised that it actually did happen at midnight, or whenever it actually triggered?
Yeah, like midnight, 12:01 this morning, Wednesday. So I was not surprised, because what happened in March when they did a continuing resolution was the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, went along with what the Republicans wanted, and there was a firestorm of criticism from his following, right, from the Democrats themselves, from elected officials who have threatened the progressive side of the Democratic Party to try to unseat people who support or at least compromise with the Republicans. And so they really needed to do something, he felt, I'm sure. Whether or not that plays out a victory for the Democrats or the Republicans, I think the American public is the loser here.
Yeah, well, and in Monroe County, in our region, we were talking about TSA, but we don't have like a Rocky Mountain National Park next door to us. So where else could we feel the impact a week or two in, do you think?
Well, we're not that far from places like Seneca Falls, National Women's Rights Historic Park, right? So that would close. Certainly, in terms of federal money, in terms of money coming for transportation, right? Some money that has been allocated but might be impounded during this time period that could have gone to pay for some of the working projects we've seen, many of which you've been reporting in your station have been delayed for a long time for various reasons. And so that could affect our everyday lives and our commute. So absolutely that. And again, there are some healthcare subsidies that are not part of your traditional social services package. Those could be withheld, which would then affect some of the citizens of the state of New York. So even if our region doesn't feel it automatically, again, trying to cross the border into Canada and some other things where you have these essential workers who are not going to be paid, that could affect how many lanes are open, could lead to delays. It could lead to delays in moving goods back and forth across the border. So, yeah, I think our region's going to feel the pinch, maybe not immediately, but certainly within the next 7 to 10 days.
So, in addition to that, we're seeing some jobs reports saying the job market is weakening. We talk about several 100,000 at the same time we're a country of 300 some odd million. How much does that affect the jobs aspect of this at this point? Because they technically would be furloughed, but thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think in the short term, the question is it a furlough or a firing, right? So right now, we're still in a furlough stage, but if this were to drag out, would the federal government begin to lay people off? Already, it affects the D.C. economy pretty dramatically. Just the cuts going back to last summer and when Trump first came into office, is having an effect upon the District of Columbia as we're seeing more and more people having to leave that area. And as those federal workers are looking for jobs, obviously they're moving out of there, which decreases the revenue for that area, and also tourist dollars. if you were planning to go to D.C., you might think twice, because will the Smithsonian be open, and will the National Mall, right? I can look at the Washington Monument, but now I can't go inside because maybe they don't have the funding for that. So that could certainly affect some tourism dollars. And what does that do? It at some point, it's going to make it even more difficult for that area to thrive. And again, a lot of people in the Rochester area have business with lobby groups and et cetera down in DC.
That's a good point. No, that's absolutely true. It's interesting. I'm supposed to go on honor flight with the veterans on Saturday. So, I mean, that's pretty close. I can't imagine, it'll affect it too much, but I was wondering. I mean, a lot of the memorials that we're going to go to are outside the Vietnam Memorial, but still, one has to wonder.
Exactly. I'm sure the National Guard will still be down there in terms of they've been deployed and they would be considered essential. But and the monuments should be accessible, but that would affect restrooms. I mean, the restrooms would be closed when they run out of money. Mm-hmm. And there's, if you've ever been on the mall, it's it's one of those things where it's a minor inconvenience, but it could be a major one, particularly as you're dealing with people who are coming from a long distance.
Yeah, and maybe older too.
And older, right.
Yeah, so is this just the way things operate? I just don't remember when I really started to kind of come online in the 90s and pay attention. I didn't hear about shutdown talk a whole lot, but I might have just been missing it. Has this always been kind of on the table?
This is really a problem in the last 50 years. We used to actually have budgets that were delivered on time, and we had an operating budget for the government for a whole year. And then what started in the 70s and 80s, parts of the budget were passed, but not the entire government funded. So there would be debates about this or that allocation of funds, and that could lead to potential shutdowns. Of course, one of the major ones was under the Clinton administration, when after the Republicans had seized control or were elected to the House in the election of '94, and they shut the government shutdown, lasted November to December, and that was pretty dramatic. So in terms of the length, that one I think was maybe the bellwether for what's been happening ever since. It seems to be both sides want what they want in terms of policy delivery, and the lack of negotiation between the two sides is causing these shutdowns.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned kind of the last 50 years. I notice a lot of the kind of like one side would do one thing and the other side, now we can do that too, and we'll do this. So I think it was Borking, if I'm not mistaken. I'm stretching my my social studies memory here, where in the 80s the Democrats held up a Supreme Court nomination, and that really had never been, that was novel. And then the Republicans, so it's like, it's almost like who shot first, and we just keep escalating. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't want to take your...
No, you are correct in terms of how nationalized our elections have become, even down to the local level, but going back up. That really comes out of the 80s and 90s, and that's affected the way people operate in terms of policy. There's very few people who have the sort of independent entrepreneurial Democratic or Republican label who can go out and support one side or the other without having some sort of response from their caucus. And so that limits the ability of independent actors to go across partisan lines. Yeah. And, Robert Bork was quite surprised, and it was a pretty nasty affair. But again, it shows how national politics became.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the threat of primaries now is just so public. Like, if you disagree in any way, do you remember there used to be this person voted with party 80% of the time or 60% of the time? Now it's like, if it's not 100% of the time or 90% of the time, you get primaried, and hardcore primaried.
Yeah, because there are outside funders now. There's so much of this money from outside the district where you're running anyway that comes in, and some progressive money or some MAGA money that can really affect who gets selected to run in November. And of course, gerrymandering is in the news too. So it's just gotten to the point where I think the American citizen is now caught between these two political entities that are supposed to be helping the American Republic, not harming it. And we may be at a point now where the partisanship of the parties is dysfunctional rather than functional for operating good democratic society.
Again, when I started to come online, it was, Ross Perot, third party. That was pretty much the closest I ever heard. I mean, Ralph Nader made a little bit of a run, I suppose, in 2000. But does this mean we could potentially see a legitimate third party? I mean, we always say that, but it never happens.
Well, here's the weird thing about that is that we talk about, running for president on a third party, but you have to be on the ballot in the states. And we saw RFK trying to do that, and he just got baffled by state laws. Here's the thing. The party that decides elections is the party in power. And so each state, they've written laws to make it harder for non-party members to get on the ballot. We did that in New York. We've increased the number of signatures and the other kind of scrutiny we do, and who gets a ballot representation after an election based upon the percentage of votes. That has reduced competition, which of course the parties like, but the citizens may not. So that's one of the barriers, is getting on a ballot in each state to make it worthwhile to run for president. Now, Ross Perot had it easier. He was a billionaire and he could afford. And again, there weren't these barriers maybe back in the early 1990s when he first ran.
One thing I was wondering about with the shutdown, we talk about the incentive for one party to break or not. The fact that we don't have an off-year election, we are in an off-off year. They might say to themselves, we can recover if this goes even 40 days, 60 days. We have an entire year to try and recover. What are your thoughts on that, the timing of this?
Yeah, the timing is the perfect storm in terms of the American citizen, because you're right, there's no accountability. Like there won't be a dramatic shift. I guess we'll look at polling data, but it depends on who's doing the polling and who they're talking to, and both sides know that. The polls have proven the last, several election cycles to be a little out of whack in terms of how the public actually shows up and votes, as opposed to what we're being told is going to happen. And so I think even there's a kind of healthy skepticism towards some of the polling data.
Yeah, and you just hear more and more, and again, a lot of this is social media driven, and it's the smaller voices getting amplified and all that, but it's almost like nihilism or anarchy among somebody, like, the system's broken, throw it out. And, you're going to have a segment of the population that's going to see this and be good, let's do it.
Yes.
And it's, but you see the day-to-day, the overarching impact.
It's a negative impact on our everyday life. We no longer live in an era in which the federal government is far away and unimportant in our everyday lives. It has become significant. Everything from our education to our libraries to our roads to even our tax base and our citizens, and all of this has to be dealt with in a reasonable fashion, which used to mean some compromise. You don't get everything you want, but you get sufficient, and then you hope that the public likes that and supports your side in the next election. But if we think about some of the most significant changes, right, in the 1960s, things like the Voters' Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, Medicare A and Part A and B, and in terms of that, there was a lot of bipartisan support for this legislation. You don't see that anymore. You see mostly party lines. The Affordable Care Act passed on party lines. And so we live in a system where, again, maybe the political parties have become a dysfunction, and exactly what the Anti-Federalist warned us about years ago. And instead of the kind of stuff that we used to teach in our American government classes, oh no, parties bring the people closer to government, and they're held accountable, and all of these wonderful things. But you don't see that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, boy, you're right. The words of Washington are ringing louder and louder. He just despised the idea of party. I mean, I understand too. It also allows people to understand what someone truly believes, what their platform generally is. So, so we don't have to look at every single candidate, and so I understand some of it, but the partisanship right now is pretty biting. So, if you had to look in your crystal ball, who breaks here? What do you think?
I think on this case, I think the Democrats would be the more likely to break since they are the party sort of out of power. And Donald Trump does not look at the polls necessarily. I mean, he's already pretty low in terms of, how people are rating his performance. So he's really got nothing to lose. Plus, I mean, constitutionally at least, he's in his last term. So, he can hold out for as long as he wants. And, it'll be the congressional Republicans that are going to beg him to let them compromise. But I don't see him allowing that unless he can get some good press from it. Yeah. And we saw the kind of press that he got on his social media platform, releasing that egregious, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries video that was doctored by AI. So I'm not sure he's willing to compromise.
Yeah. Speaking of Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries saying that in the meeting, and you can see it in some of the photographs, there's hats saying Trump 2028, which alludes to a third term. You say it's unconstitutional. What would have to change in order for that to happen?
Well, I mean, we would have to change the Constitution, or we would have to have some sort of national emergency where elections were somehow suspended. But even though a lot of people see the Supreme Court as siding with Trump, those initial decisions are just delaying what will be a much more lengthy and serious consideration of some of the ways that Trump is trying to rewrite the Constitution. And I can't imagine the courts or the people in general. I mean, look, if you look at who really supports Donald Trump, you're probably looking at a third or less of the country. A number of, there was even criticism of Trump when he went to Charlie Kirk's funeral, because most people were talking bipartisan and love your enemy and these kind of things. And, Stephen Miller and Donald Trump were talking about revenge and that kind of thing. And it just hit a sour note for some Republicans and left a bad taste. So, and even Marjorie, Taylor Greene thinks that Trump isn't Trump enough anymore. So there may be a break in his coalition that would shatter any of his fantasies of 2028, unless, of course, he's talking about one of his children.
Yeah,
I mean, that could be the Trump in 2028 we're talking about.
That is interesting. I didn't even think about that. So I'm wondering if there's a crisis that could play a role in what happens with the shutdown. We've got potential boiling points with Israel and Gaza, with Ukraine and Russia, with the stock market. I mean, it's fine now, but if it were to continue, do you think that those could play a role where then both sides be like, all right, we got to stop this game. We have to get the train back on the tracks here.
If you'd asked me that 20 years ago, I would have said absolutely, Adam. But right now, again, this almost arms race in terms of the two sides. I mean, Texas is going to do that mid-level, reconfiguration of the districts, i.e. gerrymandering, and California jumps on board, and then, you got Missouri talking about it, you got Michigan, you've got all of this. So it is this, as you mentioned before, almost like they do this, we do that. That's not going to lead to good policy. And so but most of the people that would have had good policy have been driven out of office by both sides, right? Progressives have driven out, so the moderates in their party, and the MAGA have driven out the Republicans who are more moderate in their party, and leaving probably the bulk of the American people scratching their head.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to throw a dark horse in here. I got a few minutes left, and then unfortunately I got to let you go because, as you know, I could talk to you about this stuff forever. The dark horse here, I'm wondering, eventually the House is going to have to swear in the House Democrat who won. She's going to be, I think it was in Arizona. She's going to be, from what I understand, the tipping point vote on the Epstein files, the release of the Epstein files. Should that be released, and should there be information in there that's harmful to the president or not? I mean, I wonder if that could play a role in the coming weeks. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if the Epstein files were actually released and there was some documentation in there that undercut the president's status among his followers, that could be the exact shift that then allows Congress to feel that they've got the upper hand. And it could even be a ploy if the Republicans really do want to come to the table to say, okay, Mr. President, We voted to release them, but we get to decide the rules on how we release those. So if you'll let us negotiate with the Democrats, we'll make sure we kind of slow walk it and we don't let everything out all at once. And we take months and committees looking it over to decide what's accessible and what's not, what gets redacted. I mean, when Nixon turned over his tapes and transcripts or whatever, there were things missing and a lot of redactions. And so they could go that route if they wanted, but maybe that's the ploy the Republicans need within their party to make a movement on some of these issues.
Yeah, no, you make a great point there. And then we just heard that the FCC governor is going to be able to keep her seat at least through the end of the year. So there's going to be a lot of financials at play, I think, over the next 2 or 3 months. And it's interesting. A lot of us, I think, well, this is how it's always been. We're used to it. But to me, there does seem to be we seem to be approaching a crossroads here. And I don't even know what that means. And again, I might just be kind of reading into the headlines too much, but your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think you're just reacting to an extreme point of view. After the rise of political violence is becoming a new normal.
Right.
This partisanship that, at any cost is becoming a new normal. We really are at a crossroads, and the only way maybe a third party could grow is not from the top down. It has to be from the bottom up. It would have to be something that starts, the last major party that erupted was the Republicans, Ripon, Wisconsin, right, 1852 or something, and then they meet and they form this new political party. And then what they did is they found people who were disaffected with the two parties who were already in office. And that's how you would do it. You'd graft into some of the disaffected leadership that already exists. And then maybe from there we could see something. And again, I'm not picking sides. I'm saying they're both playing a game that's not sustainable for good policy.
No. Any other thoughts, Tim, before we take off here on the shutdown and where we go from here?
Well, I think this is a time more than ever that the people watching this, not to give up, but to actually get involved. I mean, this is the only way you're going to change it. Again, both factions in the parties are small, and there's many more Americans out there who may look at this and just say, I've had enough. Don't give up. Get involved. That would be what I would do.
Yeah. All right. Tim Nealon, thank you so much. I always appreciate your time and insight.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Adam.
All right. Tim Nealon, a professor over at Nazareth University, offering us the answers that we're looking for, perspective that we're looking for, both on the local, state level, but then today the federal level and how it could affect the state and local level. So a big thanks to Nazareth University for lending him to us. I know he has to run to a class right now, so with that I'm going to wrap up and thank all of you for once again joining us for this edition of Adam Interviews. We hope to see you back here tomorrow night, and tell your friends about the Rochester First app. Great to have, put it right next to your Netflix. Get to eat your vegetables before you have your dessert. All right, everyone, take care of yourself, and we will see you back here next time.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.